Sometimes the universe more obviously reveals itself, unfolding as it does in a coincidence of synchronicities, to place before us the piece of the puzzle that had previously been missing.
That was a good one. So we have some more gear to demo on the channel today, and that is this thing, which is the Audrey II Horrorscape Feedback Synth by Synthuk Academy. Now, this is a really intriguing concept, if you ask me. But before we get into what it is and get into some of the sound demos, we're going to need to build this, or I'm going to need to build this, because this is the DIY kit. So let's just take a look in the box. So first of all, we get this rather funky packaging with these really cool illustrations on it. Right, let's have a look in here. So this is the faceplate. Again, very, very interesting design. Really like that. We have this matrix for our through hole components. And we have the base plate with some more illustrations and yeah, some looks like useful information on there as well. Very nice indeed. Okay, and then let's take a look at what else we get in the box. So we also get a card with some more information and QR codes on, and a sticker of whatever that is. We get a cable. I think that's USB-C to micro USB, whatever that's called. It's the cable you need anyway. And we get this rather nice container box with all of our components. So knobs, potentiometers, our wires, the daisy seed, which I guess is the heart of this synthesizer, and all of our other components. And this, which I believe is just a nice little key ring. So yeah. Now, I've been led to believe that this is a fairly straightforward build. It does involve some soldering, but I believe it is fairly beginner, fairly basic. I guess we'll find out how I get on with it. I don't think I'm going to film much of it. I'll try and get some footage, but I'm probably going to do a lot of the build off camera. But then we will come back and we'll talk about this thing a little bit, and then the most important thing, we'll take a listen. That is the focus of today's video, the Audrey II Horrorscape Feedback Synth by Synthuk Academy. Let's get into the build. The first thing that I need to do is to put the female header pins into the board and then solder those in. So they're in place. I'm going to flip the board over and begin soldering these. So I need to make sure that these header pins are flush to the board. So as instructed, I am soldering the ends 2 pins in first to make sure that it's sitting nice and flush. So I'm just going to do the other row of header pins in the same way, and then we'll solder the rest of them in. As with most soldering jobs, holding the parts in the correct place seems to be the trickiest part. I think that's looking okay, so I'll try and zip through the rest of them. Okay, so I've soldered the female headers onto the board, and then I've placed the male header pins into those female sockets, I guess you'd call them. So now what I need to do is place the daisy seed controller onto the male header pins and solder these in. So what I think I'm going to do is solder the corner ones first to make sure that it's nice and flush, and then I'll solder the rest. And what I'll probably do is jump around a little bit so that I'm not building up too much heat in any one area. That's my game plan anyway, so yeah, let's do that. Okay, that could have been better, but never mind, we'll carry on. How are we sitting? That seems to be nice and flush, so I'm happy with that side of things. Let's do the rest of these. So moving on to the next stage, I have now placed all of the components onto the board. This is fairly straightforward. They're all numbered, and each component type can only really go in one orientation. It takes a little bit of trial and error to figure out how they need to go, but they're all in place. And I've put the 2 washers on this potentiometer and the 2 washers on this potentiometer as instructed. So now that means that I can place the faceplate on top, if I can line it up. And now what that will allow me to do is to flip the board over and to solder these components in place so that they are definitely all lined up with the holes. I need to do this switch first because that is, sorry, I wasn't in shot then. I do need to do this switch first because it's kind of loose, so we need to get that one sorted first and then we can do the rest. You know what I forgot to do? I forgot to put the washers on to keep this faceplate in place. I don't know why I didn't realise that sooner. Anyway, these only need to be finger tight, but that should let us, right, okay, that's holding everything a lot more solidly. So yeah, I guess I can just work my way around the board and solder all of these components in. What are you barking for, Jakey? Right, one down. That many to go, however many that many is. What a sentence that was. Okay, I'm going to do this off camera. All of the components are soldered in place now. So that means I can remove this faceplate, and what I need to do now is to connect all of the wires so these wires are all pre-tinned, but I have a feeling that what I might need to do is to trim these down so that we don't have too much excess wire taking up too much space, basically, because we do need to then put the faceplate. We do need to put the faceplate back on. So if we can keep the wires to a minimum, I think that would be good. Okay, the first wires are in place. I haven't soldered them in yet, but hopefully you can just see how I'm cutting these down from the original size to a more appropriate length. So I'm just doing the grounds and the VCC at the moment, and then we'll move on to all of the others. But I think I'm just going to get these soldered in before they move anywhere. Let me just double check that I'm definitely got them in the right place. I'm watching the tutorial video.
The ground on the left is going to be connected to pin 48.
48.
VCC to
VCC.
pin 29.
29.
The ground on the right is going to be connected to pin 20.
20. Yes, okay. Good, good. Right, let's go for this then before I change my mind. Okay, they are done. Let's trim those down. I probably don't need to trim them, to be honest, but I have done. Right, okay. I'm going to carry on like that. Again, you don't really need to watch me do every single one, so I'll come back when I've got a bit further along. There we go. I have wired up and soldered everything, all of the components, all of the wires, and I'm pretty pleased with how that's come out. I think that I've done quite a neat job there, probably the neatest wiring job I've ever done, which is not something that I'm normally particularly good at. And look at all of this extra cable that I haven't used, so anyone would think that I was being a complete skinflint with the wiring. But yeah, so that phase is done. So next I can actually, I'm pretty sure I can put the faceplate back on. We can attach all of the washers and nuts and pots, these things. And then I think we just need to connect it up and install the sort of firmware so that it will actually make some sound. And then I think we're ready to go. So yeah, I'm going to do that next, although I'm probably going to get some dinner first, but that is the next step anyway. Okay, so at this point in the build, I did actually make a bit of a mistake, and I rushed ahead thinking that I could put the faceplate on and put the nuts and knobs in place. However, this was a bit of an issue for two reasons. One, to install the firmware, you need to press two buttons on the daisy seed, which, although not impossible, is a lot more difficult with the faceplate in place. Secondly, you're meant to put two washers onto every potentiometer before installing the faceplate, which I didn't check, and I just sort of rushed ahead. So this meant that I thought I was finished and then realised that I needed to take all of them back off again and remove the faceplate and do what I needed to do before putting them all back on again. Well, I can't get that one off now, can I? Not very easily, anyway. I thought this would be the easy bit, but oh my god. Right, I might have to take more drastic measures. So if you're thinking of getting this kit, just be aware that that's quite an important step. I found this aspect of the build perhaps the most tricky part of the whole thing, which I thought would be the easiest. Right. Gotcha. All right, there we go. My word, that was more difficult than it needed to be, I think. Or I made it more difficult than it needed to be. So yes, this is the Audrey II Horrorscape synthesizer. It is a purely digital synthesizer based on feedback synthesis, i.e. using feedback as a sound source. What first drew me to this was one of the videos that Synthuk Academy put out. I believe it was titled Mastering Feedback, the Art of Sonic Chaos, or something along those lines. I'll put a link in the description below. Now, the reason that really caught my eye is because at the time I was actually trying to develop my own software synthesizer purely within Logic Pro, i.e. using all of the plugins and the functionality that is contained within that DAW, and using feedback or a feedback loop as a sound source with various kind of controls and parameters to allow you to interact with and sort of sculpt that sound. Now, I was having some difficulties getting that to work in the way that I had envisioned. I'm still working on that synth. It is still a work in progress, and I intend to get that finished at some point, and I would like to kind of make that available to you. Around that same time, because I'd hit a bit of a brick wall using a feedback loop to generate the sound source, I actually went on to develop some other synths using a different technique for the source of the sound creation, again entirely within Logic Pro. And I've actually made a number of these which are almost completed, and I will be making those available to you if you're interested. You will need to have Logic Pro. These synths do only run inside that piece of software. They aren't standalone. They don't operate independently from that DAW. However, they are coming very soon. So if you're interested in that, stick around. I will have videos coming out about that in due course. The video for Audrey II came along at this time when I was struggling with the feedback synthesis, and it just rang a bell. It was as if the universe had put it in my lap at the perfect time to try and encourage me to continue with my experiments and to try and get a working synth based on feedback synthesis. So I'm very grateful to Synthuk Academy for that inspiration, and it also made me want to get my hands on this thing and to actually be able to enjoy using a synthesizer based on feedback. So a couple of things about this that I think might be useful to point out. So this is the DIY kit. You can buy a pre-assembled kit. It is a bit more expensive. I also managed to get my hands on one of the B stock, which I think there were some slight defects with the faceplate. I mean, I can see some ever so slight marks on here. I mean, to be honest, I can't really see a lot wrong with it, and that is really not much of a concern to me. I tend to be a little bit heavy-handed, and it wouldn't be unlike me to scratch this or something anyway, so it really didn't bother me. This isn't a sponsor video. I did buy this with my own money. So yeah, you can buy a pre-assembled version of the synth or a DIY kit. I don't know if I'd describe it as a beginner project. It depends. I think if you've got some experience of soldering, this shouldn't be too much of a challenge. If you're completely new to soldering, you might want to do a little bit of practicing elsewhere before spending your money on this and potentially messing it up a little bit. But it isn't incredibly difficult. It is quite a basic build. One other thing I do want to point out is that, I don't know if you can see, where this daisy seed sits on the actual main PCB, there is this black sort of square doodad that sits on the top of the board. I don't actually know what that does, but it sits at a height. When you put the faceplate down, it's actually bending the PCB that the daisy seed sits on down on this corner. I don't know if you can see the gap this end compared to the gap this end. It is bending that down fairly noticeably. Now, I don't think that's a huge issue. It does bug me a little bit, but you know, it's a very minor thing, but I thought it's worth pointing out to you. Okay, so we're going to do a sound demo of this thing. You have heard some examples of this throughout the rest of the video. However, what I thought would be really interesting is if we actually have a duel between two feedback synthesizers. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. And in one corner, we're going to have the Audrey II Horrorscape synthesizer. And in the other corner, we're going to have my own software synthesizer, which I've cautiously titled Infinite Mirrors, designed entirely within the Logic Pro application. And we're going to get these two instruments hopefully singing in harmony with one another.